Thank you again for everyone who's joined us live today for this webinar by Ecopia AI featuring Bluesky. We're excited to have all of you join us. In fact, we have more than 100 registrations from over 30 countries, and that explains the power of geospatial data and the interest in learning more about AI. Now, this is an important topic. In a rapidly changing world, staying up to date is important for geospatial professionals and decision makers. There's a lot of talks these days about AI and advancements in mapping. Now, what has happened is the advancements in high resolution imagery and mapping today make it possible to extract information in a real time manner, which will allow all of us to get the insights we need to make the decisions which are important for communities across the world, from land use to wildlife management to infrastructure planning to climate resiliency. There's a lot we can do when we combine the power of high resolution imagery and AI-based mapping. To talk about this, we have two experts from our companies. So we have Abigail Koholik from Ecopia AI. Many of you know Abby. Abby is the Senior Director of Channel Partnerships at Ecopia. She collaborates with a number of satellite and aerial imagery partners to grow their revenue per pixel around the world. She has worked with partners to develop custom plans to grow their business, impart technical training, and find out how they can grow their business while working together. Now, she is known for her innate ability to develop mutually beneficial partnerships. And that is proven by the fact that she has led Ecopia's global partnership network to what it is today with over 30 imagery partners. Thank you, Abby, for joining us today. Also, our friend from the UK, we have Ralph, the Chief Commercial Officer at Bluesky. Hey, Ralph. He's been with them for over 23 years now after graduating in urban and regional geography. His success in sales to both the private sector and the government sector has led him to join the Bluesky board in 2010 as the head of their sales and business development. As the CCO, he has built a talented team on delivering the best value to their customers, both public sector as well as private sector. He's made Bluesky a supplier of choice for aerial imagery and height data to the UK public sector, and he plays a key role in their direct contact and contract with the Cabinet Office. Ralph's experience allows him to identify new opportunities and influence innovation and product development, not only at Bluesky, but across the world with the companies they work with and the partnerships they have. Thank you, Ralph, for joining us today. And it's exciting to have you both. And now to kickstart this webinar, I'll hand over to Ralph to talk about Bluesky's countrywide high-resolution imagery capabilities. Over to you, Ralph.
Harney, thank you very much indeed for that very grand introduction. And good afternoon to everybody from the UK, and good morning to everybody from over the Atlantic, and good evening potentially to people further east. So welcome all of you, and thank you very much for joining the webinar. I'm just going to spend a few minutes introducing Bluesky and some of our key products. Then I'm going to segue into something a little bit different, and at the time I do it, it might seem a bit odd, but it'll soon become clear why I'm doing that. And then I'm going to pass you over to Abigail in a few minutes to start talking about their 3D land cover data. So just to get kicked off, who are Bluesky? If you don't know who Bluesky is, we're an aerial survey and geospatial data company. We've been around now for probably about 25 years in various guises, but Bluesky was actually formed in 2003. We've got approximately 100 staff. We're headquartered in a small market town in England called Ashby-de-la-Zouch, about as far away from the sea as you can get in England, in fact. We have offices in Massachusetts in the US, and we have some offices over in Ireland as well, and a couple of offices in India where we do a lot of our production work. We're quite well known in the industry for being innovators, so we like to create innovative products and services that tackle specific problems in the market, and we pride ourselves on that. We don't create product and technology for the sake of it. We like to identify problems in the market and use our expertise and geospatial data sets to tackle those problems. And we actually work in lots and lots of different vertical market sectors across both the public and private sector. So as Harneet mentioned, we're the supplier of choice for the Great British government for the provision of aerial photography and terrain data sets. We also work with lots of public sector organisations over in the Republic of Ireland as well. But we also work with utility companies, insurance companies, civil engineering, the AEC marketplace, environment, renewables companies. So we've got quite a broad scope in terms of the applicability of our products. So yeah, we're fairly experienced in terms of applying what we do with aerial survey to create both product and services for a broad spectrum of organizations. So rather than show you lots of words, because we work in an industry that's so visual, I thought I'd show you some images of our products, what we would consider our core products. So I think we would consider aerial photography as really the mainstay of our product group, still our product suite, and we acquire lots of a broad range of aerial photography resolutions. So we capture 12.5 centimeter resolution image, auto-rectified aerial photography across the whole of Great Britain. We capture 25 and 12.5 centimeter aerial photography in the Republic of Ireland, but we also capture much higher resolution aerial photography in urban areas where applications can require slightly more detail in imagery. So aerial photography is really one of the mainstays of our product range. Over and above that, we also generate photogrammetrically from that aerial photography a range of terrain products. So as standard from our off-the-shelf aerial photography product, we create digital surface models. So what's often referred to as a first surface, including vegetation, buildings, all of those ground artifacts on the first surface. And we output those data sets at either 25 centimeter or 1 meter resolution, depending on the location. But we also generate digital terrain models. Oh, hang on, I just skipped on ahead. We also generate digital terrain models as well from those digital surface models. So we edit those digital terrain models to create the bald earth models, mainly used in things like flood model monitoring, which we'll come on to in more detail later on in the webinar. So those are very much our core products, along with our color infrared layer. And I mentioned this last because it's a slightly more niche product that's used mainly for vegetation classification, vegetation health studies, but it is a product that we do output nationally as well across the whole of Great Britain and Republic of Ireland, and also in some areas of Eastern US as well. One particular product that we're very proud of is our national tree map. So hopefully some of you will have heard of this product. We, about 10, 11 years ago, we embarked on a very ambitious plan to map tree canopy across the whole of Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland now, in fact, identifying the location, the height, and the size of tree canopies. This is a product that's been really broadly adopted. We've had applications appear from organisations we never envisaged that would use a product of this type, but the National Tree Map has been a real success story for Bluesky, and I'll talk a little bit more about the applications of the National Tree Map later on. This looks obviously very much like the terrain models I've just shown you, but this is actually a LiDAR terrain model rather than a photogrammetrically derived terrain model. We do a lot of LiDAR acquisition using our Terrain Mapper 2 sensors. This is actually a LiDAR image from Republic of Ireland. You can see the LiDAR we capture in Ireland very often shows a lot of archaeology. So here you can see evidence of traditional hill forts, traditional field boundaries here on this LiDAR image. It's a really amazing area to capture LiDAR data with the amount of history you can see in LiDAR. But the LiDAR we usually capture is mostly for commissioned work rather than on a speculative basis. So we take an order from a customer, we capture the data, and then we deliver it to the customer for a whole broad range of different applications. Here, I just want to mention our Metro Vista data set. So more recently, we've launched a range of products that we've branded Metro Vista. These are city-based products. You can see here, it's an image of quite a famous area of central London at 5 centimeter resolution. These are highly detailed vertical ortho photos captured using our Leica City Mapper sensors. These are combined with high resolution oblique images as well. So here you see an oblique image of a container port. So we get both the verticals, the obliques, but also very high point density LiDAR data as well. So what we've got here is a 50 to 60 point per meter image, LiDAR point cloud image of the O2 Arena, or if you're as old as me, the Millennium Dome. And if we can combine all of these data sets to get together to create these vivid textured meshes, or reality meshes, they're sometimes called. And again, I'll move on to this a bit later as well, but we're seeing a really broad adoption of 3D data of this type just at the moment. It's an extremely exciting time for data sets of this type. Okay, this is where I'm going to move on to something a little bit. It may seem a little bit odd, but bear with me, and it'll all become apparent in a minute. So, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Republic of Ireland for those of you who don't know. So, the Republic of Ireland's a relatively small country. It's a very rural country with only five cities. It has a primate city, Dublin. So, Dublin is very much the largest city in the Republic of Ireland. It has four other quite small cities, potentially large towns rather than cities. The vast majority of the land mass of Ireland is used for farming or forestry, so it's a really, really rural country. I'm going to read you something out now about the Irish landscape that was written by one of my colleagues who lives over in actually Northern Ireland, but spent a lot of time living in the Republic of Ireland as well. But I think it's a really beautiful description of the Irish landscape. So Ireland has a vivid and varied landscape which has been sculpted by the process of glaciation, abundant winds and significant rainfall. The often rugged and craggy coastline, particularly in the west, is bounded by mountain ranges which give way to low-lying bogs in the centre. The east coast is generally made up of softer sediments which are prone to coastal erosion and flooding. The people of Ireland predominantly live close to the coastal fringes, most notably Dublin, Cork, Galway and Limerick. Now, I think he should have been a poet, actually, not a geospatial data salesperson, but that gives you a flavour of the Irish landscape. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the environmental landscape of Ireland as well, since we're talking about climate resiliency in this particular webinar, and a little bit how the Irish government are working towards their climate action plan, which was founded in 2021. They're committing to net zero greenhouse gases, like most governments, by 2050, with quite an ambitious target of a 51% reduction by 2030. One of the most critical things of a measure of their climate action plan is to increase the proportion of renewable energy by 80% by 2030. Now, that's particularly important in Ireland, and with all of that rural landscape, it's quite a good opportunity to take advantage of those areas for things like wind farms and solar farms, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So one of the key things about this is the Irish government are incentivising farmers to make changes to their land use over and above their traditional farming to move across to renewable energy, which is a key part of that climate action plan for Ireland. Now, the reason why I mention all that is because those of you who are slightly more eagle-eyed or people who are big users of LinkedIn or follow either Bluesky or Ecopia on LinkedIn may have seen that we're launching a brand new product, or have launched a brand new product called AirMap. Now, we're not really bad spellers here. It's called AirMap for a reason. So AirMap, the spelling of air, E-I-R, is a shortening of the word Ire, which is the Irish word for island. So we thought that was a nice short brand name for this special mapping product that we're launching with Ecopia. So the official title will be AirMap, powered by Ecopia and Bluesky. And we identified with Ecopia a growing demand for consistent, accurate and rich mapping data at scale across the island of Ireland. We see loads of opportunity for a product of this type. And I'm not going to talk about the product at all, because I'll be stealing Abigail's thunder and she'll be really angry with me. So I won't say anything else about the product. But we really wanted to work with Ecopia. They're a world leader in the creation of this type of data using their algorithms, their AI algorithms. We got to know the guys there. We hit it off straight away, and we struck up a great relationship with the guys at Ecopia. We saw their product. It was accurate, it was rich, it was clean, and we were really impressed with the outputs we saw and the samples they created for us. And I think a key advantage of this relationship is we will be able to update this map in conjunction with the core products that Bluesky are updating on this 3-year cycle over in Ireland. So that'll be a key feature of this product we're creating with Ecopia. So extremely exciting time. We're really pleased to be working with Ecopia on this particular product, and we see massive potential for it over in Ireland in the next few years. And with that, I'm going to whisk you 3,500 miles approximately over the Atlantic to Abigail to talk more about the product itself.
Can you hear me all the way over here, Ralph?
Just about.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you everyone for joining. As Ralph had mentioned, we're super excited to announce this partnership with Bluesky and to create and maintain the first countrywide 3D land cover of Ireland at this GIS professional accuracy. Before I dive deeper into that actual product, as Ralph had alluded to, I'm just going to quickly explain Ecopia's mission as a company and the value we're hoping to bring to the geospatial market, just for those of you here who haven't heard of Ecopia or haven't really worked with us before. So, as many of you will know, as the market stands, geospatial data users currently have to make a continuous trade-off between affordability, accuracy, currency, and scalability. So what they can do is they can access automated softwares, right? You guys can go in and use these off-the-shelf solutions, and you can process really large areas of imagery very quickly at a lower price than using manual digitizers. But when you look at the results, only 60 to 70% of the features visible in the imagery are captured. That accuracy gap means that you now have to spend thousands of hours correcting this automated output, offsetting any time and cost savings that were achieved through automating. And alternatively, you could go with the tried and true method, a traditional map source, manual digitizers. You can train these teams and you can get a high quality data set, but it's either going to take a lot of time making the data outdated before you even get it, or you're going to spend a lot of money to get this data quickly, which means you can't do it that frequently. You also have to account for the cost and time of creating the training materials. You have to reserve time to review all the data and ensure it was consistent and that the boundaries between the tiles were merged accurately. And so this trade-off of time versus cost means it hasn't really been feasible to keep maps up to date at the cadence of change that's really happening. And we all know that what a city looks like today is going to vary drastically in 6 months, let alone in 3 to 5 years. And this harms the power of making effective policies and being able to track the success of strategies or adapt them because you're using old data. And this is why Ecopia's AI-enabled systems are so powerful. We extract data at countrywide scales in record timelines while maintaining the accuracy you achieve through manual digitization. In addition to being quick and affordable, the data is normalized, right? Because it's the AI system doing all the outputs, which means that you can do true updating instead of map recreation, which is really critical when we talk about digital twins and the speed at which we want new data. Now, the way we do this is with our proprietary semi-automated approach, which is merging the output of our best-in-class neural network with a robust and highly automated quality control process. So that means when Ecopia or Bluesky deliver you this air maps or any other 3D land cover product, you're going to be able to use it right away, and there's not going to be time that you need to reserve for quality assurance. And of course, I just want to re-emphasize, many of you probably know about our large projects, but just because there is manual involvement doesn't mean we're not delivering data to you fast. In just 3.5 weeks, we mapped all the buildings and forests across South Korea and Taiwan in 3D. So it's going to be a really quick but highly accurate product. But what you guys all probably want to hear more about is this countrywide extraction, the first ever map of Ireland at this high level of accuracy. And that comes from using Bluesky's really excellent high resolution 12.5 centimeter and 30 centimeter stereo imagery. And it's going to include 3D buildings done through the automated photogrammetric process, roads, sidewalks, driveways. You can read that full list there. But that's what we're going to create across the full country. And you're going to have a 25 centimeter RMSE in the cities and a 50 centimeter RMSE across the full country. And these layers are going to be updated annually. So let's dig into this high quality that I'm talking about and look at the actual features, right? So I think to start, we are known for our building footprints, and that's because we're actually positioning the structure where it meets the ground and not at the rooftop level. So that's why here, when you're looking at this circled building, there appears to be a misalignment between the roof and the imagery and the building vector. This is really important that you position these features properly, especially when you have really tall buildings, and that's where you see the majority of skew or distortion in imagery, which is just natural. But if you extracted it at the rooftop level, you can be putting that building off position by 300 meters when you're looking at these super tall structures. And then when it comes to that tricky European row housing, our AI is going to be able to differentiate those individual structures using different components of the imagery to make sure they're divided accurately. And then we're not struggling with any partial obstructions in the imagery. As you can see here, there's some tree overhang, but the buildings are still extracted to their full length. We're not just stopping where you start to see that partial obstruction. And then when it comes to roads, your standard topology is going to be used, We're going to attribute these features with widths as well. And this topology is super important, especially for like an engineering use case. You need the nodes at all the vertexes, and you want to make sure there's no undershoots or overshoots, unless if that's where a road actually ends, and that's what our data is going to look like. Now, Ireland is so lovely because of all the tree coverage, that beautiful natural environment Ralph was speaking to earlier. But I know that for all the GIS people on here, that's a cause for concern. So I added another example here of just where a tree is covering a road, as you can see here. But we're going to maintain that continuity, this black and the yellow here, showing that the road continues in spite of these obstructions. And then this high GIS professional quality, all those features matching what they actually look like, the lack of jagged lines, that's consistent across this full data set. And of course, this is contiguous, so there's no holes in any of the data. Now, when we look at the 3D buildings specifically, all the different height components of the building are going to be captured. So that was the 3D view. Now you have like a top down, so you could see how complex the structure is itself with all the different height components. And then here you're seeing that it's actually extracted, right? So you're getting all those unique components, and even paved areas in between are going to be distinguished as so. And then in order to make this data useful, we attribute the base of the building with a CID, and then we're tying back all those unique height components, which are referenced here as the PID, to that building base. So you'll know it's just it's tied to one specific building, but you're still getting that those multi-components. And this is just, again, showing that difference. You see that CID is the same, but a different PID. And then specifically, we're attributing both relative and absolute heights to this data. And when it comes to these unique these smaller features, these height components, we're still extracting those so long as they're 9 meters squared or larger. And they're just a 3D visualization of that small features. You can see this here on this church. And then, of course, just from the topology, we're going to make sure that the building parts aren't running through each other. So from that, I'll leave it to Ralph to now get into some of these use cases.
Thanks, Abigail. Pretty exciting stuff. Really, really excited to start working with some customers with some of the AirMap data. So thanks for describing how wonderful it's going to be, Abigail. That's great. What I want to do now is talk a little bit about how we've been using some of our own products, Bluesky's products, with some of our customers, specifically related to climate resiliency, but also how we believe that the 3D land cover data that Ecopia are creating in Ireland could augment some of these applications and actually create more value for customers when they're combined with some of the Bluesky products. So I've tried to largely split these case studies and applications into two main areas. The first, just talking about more tackling the causality of climate change. So looking at things like changing the profile of how we create our energy, wind farms, solar roof arrays, carbon capture and sequestration, and also things like EV charging for electric vehicles. Obviously, the transition to electric vehicles is moving at pace at the moment. For example, I was with some friends at the weekend. There were 6 of us, and 5 of us were driving either electric or hybrid vehicles out of the 6 of us. So that just illustrates, that move. Only a few years ago, we'd all be driving some high-powered, probably boy racer vehicles rather than electric or hybrid vehicles, so that transition's moving quickly. The other area I want to move to look at here is and how we're mitigating the effects of this climate change. So rather than the causation, how we're looking at mitigating the effects. So looking at things like floods and flood defences, storm damage, subsidence around buildings, so damage to buildings from tree roots, which climate is affecting significantly, and then things like urban heat islands. So I haven't got examples of all of these, but these just show some of the areas in which we believe our products and also the AirMap product and broader 3D land cover can help with. I quite like this slide. It's a slide I use quite often. It's quite a generalized slide, but I think it really shows that our belief that geospatial data needs to be at the heart of this decision making, especially when we're talking about the climate and climate resiliency. Location and spatial data obviously has a key part to play here. And I think one thing we're sometimes guilty of in the geospatial industry is talking too much about technology, talking too much about complex technology that we don't really need to talk about. What we need to talk about is solutions. We all know in this industry, from the inside of the industry, that what we do is it can be quite complex, and it can be quite difficult to explain. And a lot of occasions, we don't need to explain that. What we need to do is explain to end users, explain to the customers what the value, the end value we're getting from this data is. And that might be in the delivery or the analysis of that data. So I think that this is something that we're trying to extol the virtues of geospatial data in most of the conversations we're having, both in a private and public sector scenario at the moment. So the first specific example I want to talk about is a long-term client of ours over in the Republic of Ireland, and that's Waterford City and County Council. We've been working with Waterford for many, many years, providing them with high specification aerial photography and terrain data sets. But more recently, they were one of the early adopters of our national tree map product over in Ireland, which we're really grateful for. Waterford are probably one of the leaders when looking at decarbonisation across their authority area, so looking at their decarbonisation targets, and they see their tree canopy coverage as a big part of that. So they wanted to benchmark their tree canopy coverage across the whole of the county, and use that in the future as a metric to see that tree canopy change moving forward. So it was really nice to see them as an early adopter. I think over and above this, the air map data could definitely augment this from a land use point of view, from a land cover point of view. So actually, where they're looking at potential areas where they could expand their tree planting, their tree canopy, knowing what the land cover situation is there could be really important for them to know, whether that's a suitable area for them to plant more trees. So, one area where we think AirMap could help. The second example I want to talk about is a company called MacroWorks. So this is a slightly more straightforward example looking at solar farms. And our data has been used really broadly for solar farms across the whole of the UK and Ireland, looking at zones of visual impact or zones of theoretical visual impact where solar farms aren't necessarily the most attractive of things if you're looking in a rural area. So our terrain data sets have been heavily used by organisations using companies like MacroWorks to plan their solar farms. Over and above that, we've been our digital surface models have been heavily used across a whole range of different market sectors for also solar panel mapping for roofs as well. So solar voltaic panels on roofs, mapping the suitability for roofs across a whole housing stock, which roofs are most suitable for solar panels and which aren't. So in addition to this, from a rural setting, we're also working with many of Ireland's key consultants on wind farms as well. So again, things like zones of visual impact, using 3D land cover could be a key component of that decision-making process from a planning point of view when you're looking to site a wind turbine in a particular area or a wind farm. And that goes back to what I was saying about Ireland in general, the Republic of Ireland in general, and the makeup of the country in terms of their rural landscape. The amount of land that could be used for things like solar farms and wind farms is vast, but we need to make sure that we're providing intelligence so the right decisions can be made from a location perspective where these solar farms and wind farms are put. This is quite an interesting application from a company called Gentian, who we've been working with for a few years now. They're quite an innovative company looking at green roofs across urban areas. So green roofs is something that's popped up in the last few years, and they're very much looking at the biodiversity in cities. So green roofs can be part of the puzzle when looking at carbon reduction, and what Gentian are doing is both looking at where green roofs already exist, but also the suitability of roofs that don't have, that could potentially be sites for green roofs. And I think the 3D geometry that the Ecopia are looking at providing across, not only the main urbanized centres, but actually less urban areas, where smaller towns and villages where 3D content isn't as prevalent, could be a great help in this type of application, where green roofs are something that's becoming a bit of a thing in terms of the fight against the increase in biodiversity, should I say. This is, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, because I know Abigail's going to talk about flooding quite a bit in a few minutes, but it won't be any surprise to know that because we create so many terrain products, they're quite broadly used for flood modelling. And this particular application was a quite extreme example of flood modelling, a very, very detailed example of flood modelling, where they used our 3D textured mesh data. This organisation used our 3D textured mesh data to look at where potentially flood defences could be breached if there was certain levels of flooding in the city of Newcastle. So Newcastle experienced their worst ever floods, I think it was about 10 years ago, and actually off the back of that, a group of academics took our 3D data and did some extreme modelling of the potential flooding of the River Tyne, and I think this is an application that could really benefit from 3D land cover data provided by Ecopia, and the combination of our textured mesh with addressing data, with other mapping data, to make a much fuller picture of how flood mapping could be provided. And connected to that, JBA Risk Management, who are one of the globe's biggest providers of flood mapping data, also use our digital terrain models across the whole of the Republic of Ireland, and then they have been doing for a number of years now. And this is actually a map showing a 200-year flood event, showing both pluvial and fluvial flooding in Dublin, and you can see there the potential devastation of the flood data, the floods could cause in an event like this. And again, Abigail's going to talk more about flooding, but this very much could relate to mapping the impermeable surfaces and looking at where runoff water is people are most risk from that runoff water when we're getting a high level of rainfall in a very short space of time. This is pretty hot off the press, so I noticed that we've actually got someone on the call who on the webinar who would be particularly interested in this. We've recently signed a deal with LexisNexis, who are a global risk solutions company. We've been working with LexisNexis for a number of years, but we've signed this deal for them to be able to use our national tree map. This is specifically related to the subs risk, so subsidence risk of buildings. So looking at the proximity of trees to buildings and modelling what risk that will have for subsidence. LexisNexis are using this across the whole of Great Britain at the moment, but we're also potentially in the Republic of Ireland, and providing this data through their services to insurance companies and underwriters, so they can make better decisions around what risk is involved with subsidence. It might sound like a strange thing to talk about subsidence, but it's very much related to climate. When we have very hot temperatures, in particular soil shrinks while soils, you get ground movement, and therefore where there are trees, the tree roots can affect that shrink swell, and the ground movement becomes a real problem, and then you can get this subsidence of buildings. So it's a huge risk for across the whole range of perils for insurers, and it's an increasing risk as well. Still not up there with flood, but with the hot summers we're now having, it is also it could also have a big impact. And Richie's just kindly reminded me as well that there's a storm risk as well from falling trees for the proximity to buildings too. So that's from a couple of different points of view. And I just want to finish on this slide. Those of you who've heard me talk recently, I can never get away from a presentation or a webinar without talking a bit more about 3D data. and talking about the 3D revolution. So as an organization, we've been creating 3D content for 20 years now in various different ways, whether that's photogrammetric content or more recently these 3D textured meshes. And I think we've had a few false dawns where 3D is concerned. There has been users of 3D data for many, many years, but it hasn't been as broadly adopted as many have thought more recently. However, we think this 3D revolution is happening now, and this is another reason why we're so excited about working with Ecopia in Ireland, to have that those 3D vectors nationally, and potentially combine those with some of the more detailed 3D mesh data that Bluesky is creating, can really start to fill in that picture and, dare I say it, move towards a national digital twin type situation, and augment all the other data sets that we're currently using. So I think it's an extremely exciting time for 3D, and the data that Ecopia are going to provide for Ireland provides a lot of opportunity to start working in 3D. I was talking to one of my colleagues about this earlier, and she said to me, "You're going to say the thing you always say when you present, aren't you?" And I am going to say it, which is, we live in a 3D world. So if we can work in 3 dimensions, why should we not work in 3 dimensions? There have been barriers to that in the past, in terms of cost, in terms of software, in terms of integration of data. A lot of those barriers are now being removed. So we've got to all embrace that 3D journey, and this is a product that's very much going to help the people of the Republic of Ireland do that. So with that, I'm going to whisk you across to Abigail again, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the applications for the 3D land cover itself.
That's a hard note to end on. That was so inspiring. So I hope these use cases that we continue to go into kind of feed into what Ralph was saying, and just how important it is to have this current information, right? When you think of the digital twins, while we're not there yet, like, part of that issue is that we don't have this foundational gap. We don't have that 3D data at these large scales that's consistently updated. And I think this is such a great and huge step towards all that. So thank you for explaining all that, Ralph, and all those exciting use cases, from solar to even how trees are involved in storm risk. So I'll expand on 2 of our more recent projects that have been specifically transformative for climate resilience, as that's our topic today. So let's talk about just the general improvements our system has been making to government organizations responsible for large-scale land cover. So for the last 48 years, NOAA has been creating 30-meter land cover maps across all the coastal states of the US from open Landsat imagery, which is very similar to what's being done in Europe, and truthfully in most countries across the globe. And these maps were being used to support their CCAP program. And that CCAP program has the objective of monitoring changes to the environment, both natural and human-made, with the goal of improving overall decision-making. The team at NOAA was really focused on empowering their regional managers to make data-backed decisions and policies, and then have this updated so that they can track changes, update, adapt their strategies, and then also evaluate their effectiveness. And while the 30-meter data offered great general information about the environment, as you can see in this image here, due to the increasing impacts of climate change, the team at NOAA had been strategizing to advance the product from a 30-meter map to a 1-meter product for quite a while. And as they began to kind of evaluate the market and how they might actually do that transition, they ran into that same problem that the GIS industry has always been facing, and what I had spoken to earlier, right? There was no one solution that was highly accurate, scalable, and also affordable. And this inability to get high quality data quickly was problematic for the current environment, where everything was changing so quickly and frequently, and it was having drastic impacts on human life. So NOAA tested many solutions, and you can see here a direct comparison they made of another automated result they'd used in the past, and then Ecopia's results. And the team at NOAA has explained frequently that their previous outputs were quite accurate if you just looked at a standard automated algorithm, like what you're seeing in general, but they didn't have the detail that you really needed. Houses weren't square or as well defined as they needed. Road edges weren't always straight. Tree canopy and shadows, as we had discussed earlier as well, couldn't be handled by the AI and was causing issues. And what that meant was that they got this really quick data, and then they were spending thousands of hours, a lot of money in there to go and correct it. And then when you look at Ecopia's results, they're much more detailed, granular, and precise, and you're getting all those individual buildings. they're corresponding to the right shape, the right geometry, the roads are following standard topology. And if, again, the shadows and obstructions, they weren't impacting the ability to get these features right. And so these high quality results, again, meant that there was no need to spend the additional money to correct the outputs. And also there was a lot of time savings there. So we're offering that ready to use product that truly offered them the time and cost savings that were long promised by AI without compromising on the quality component, which they needed. And again, that quality is important because it allows for improved modeling to occur. So as again, we can see in this comparison between the two data sets, the increased precision and detail achieved from high resolution imagery and Ecopia AI systems is going to be able to enable many more applications for NOAA than just that monitoring of change. It's going to enable better hydrodynamic modeling, flood risk assessment, as Ralph had spoken to, stormwater management, and urban forestry, again, as Ralph had been speaking to. And having a complete map of all these individual features and having them described accurately is really important for that full picture of what is changing, and then properly evaluating the impacts of these different events on the environment or potential gaps in infrastructure. And here you saw a lot of man-made, but that added level of detail is also important when it comes to natural features, because it highlights, again, that like bigger green infrastructure picture, which allows us to understand how much of our environment is natural and then protect those areas or set strategies in place to improve them. And smaller water bodies or vegetation features are still playing an important role in our ecosystem. And so there's no need for them not to be captured right in that data. It's actually really important when it comes to your conservation or restoration site planning, because it's going to optimize your results. And so as a result of Ecopia's unique ability to create highly accurate land cover data at scale and the improved analysis it enabled NOAA with, last August, we were selected after many pilots to update all the coastal states' land cover maps. And this equated to over 3 million kilometers squared of area being mapped and over 70 million buildings from sub 1 meter imagery. And we've already delivered this data to NOAA. And while the scope of that project is huge and it's impressive, like what we're maintaining in the US and Italy and now Ireland with Bluesky, this recency, accuracy, and efficiency of updating is also super impactful at the city and regional level. While global warming is impacting the full world, the globe, it's our cities and communities that are individually impacted and where many policies are shaped that are going to super impact our lives. So today I'd also like to talk about the increase in paved surfaces across our communities and as a result of rapid urbanization and how we've helped the city of Detroit. So as you can see in this image, right, as we've reduced the amount of permeable surfaces in exchange for roads and buildings, we're reducing the capacity for the earth to absorb precipitation. And in a natural environment, you have infiltration handling most of this water absorption with only 10% going to runoff. But today in our built up cities, infiltration is only able to handle about 15% of precipitation, and 55% of that is turning into stormwater runoff. And not only does this put significant pressure on stormwater assets, resulting in the higher risks of flooding that we're all seeing today, especially when they're not adequately designed and maintained, but it's also degrading water resources. So as polluted water runs off of paved surfaces, it's typically entering into rivers, lakes, estuaries. And in fact, the EPA has assessed the water bodies in Ireland and found that 46% of them are impaired. So that means there's pollutants in them. And the city of Detroit was feeling the impacts of these changes. They were facing a lot of pressure to improve their sewer systems and also develop greener infrastructure, but they actually weren't receiving enough federal funding. And so to access funding needed to support all these really important new strategies and goals, they had to implement a stormwater utility fee. And that's a really great tool to fairly assign kind of resources and fees based on people actually using a public resource, but it does require that you have very high quality impervious surface maps, and they have to be updated annually. But after years of procuring this data manually, using the heads up approach that most people do, they realized it just wasn't a long-term solution, and they were encountering a lot of problems. And that comes from a couple of challenges there are with making and maintaining impervious surface maps. First of all, if you're going to assign a fee to your citizens and to businesses, you need really detailed vectors, and they have to have a high level of competence when it comes to interpretation. And that's not just for creation, but that interpretation has to be consistent year over year, especially since fees are assigned annually. And this is where Ecopia's AI is really useful. Since our AI system is generating the features, you're getting consistent and uniform data. And since the data is all extracted in this uniform way, when it comes to updating, you're actually able to do an update. It's not just a recreation of the data, which is what Detroit was paying for when they were using a manual team. Essentially, they were just redoing everything every year, which was quite challenging. And that kind of leads to the second challenge, which is that this kind of data creation is really time consuming, which meant that the city of Detroit historically was doing their calculation based on outdated data. So they were waiting 14 to 18 months to receive their new data from their manual digitizing team. And that meant that when they were doing those calculations, the data was 2 years old. And now working with Ecopia means they're getting their impervious surface map 6 weeks from imagery being flown. And then, of course, this led to some really exciting new improvements for them. So this client-centric approach that we did, which also included deep collaboration with their team, we have a great case study by the city of Detroit where they spoke to how Ecopia truly is a partner, is why the team not only has decided to expand our contract from the 3 years for additional, but also expanded the features. And that's because we had saved them over 1,000 manual hours each year. And not only that, we identified a 2% change year over year, which equates to about 5.6 million in a discrepancy on their stormwater utility fee. So there was a really strong return on investment, and the process of working with Ecopia was so smooth. And the same goes for our partners. They're always committed to that kind of support, which anyone who here knows Ralph and his team would understand that. So this was really just a big success and something that's going to have to continue to be replicated for resiliency. So on that note, we'll change over to some questions.
Okay, and I'm back. Thank you so much, Ralph and Abby, for your insights on both the high resolution imagery and the work you're doing in Ireland and other parts of the UK, and the work, Abby, we're doing at Ecopia. So let's quickly move to the Q&A round, respectful of everybody's time and the questions which have come in. If you have not asked a question so far, please do so now. You can ask a question in the Q&A tab. So what I'm going to do is I've seen a bunch of questions come in, and I'm trying to club those questions together when they're similar to each other, and I'm going to ask those questions now. So are you guys ready? Okay, let's go for them. Ralph, ready? Okay. The first question, the first two questions, Ralph, I'm going to club them together. The first question is from Peter. He's asking, just curious how you generate your tree map data set. And Duke asking, what was the completeness of the tree data set and FP rate after delivery? If you can club those questions and answer more about the maps data set.
Sure, okay. We generate our tree map using our core data sets. So we use our terrain data sets to create a DHM, and then we use some of our imagery and color infrared to filter the DHM nationally. And then we use some quite complex algorithms to then derive the tree canopies from those data sets. So there's about five or six different data sets that are used in conjunction with each other to output the tree map, the vectors for the tree map. The completeness is very good. We achieve somewhere in the region of 98 to 99% completeness in terms of the generation of the tree canopy, and that's been independently verified. And we've done various tests against our other products as well to ensure that level of accuracy. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, Arnie, I didn't catch that.
The second part of the question was the FP rate after delivery.
I don't understand the question. What's the FP rate?
Completeness and the FP rate after delivery.
Well, I think false positives or false negatives on your.
Oh, sorry, FP. Sorry, I thought you said FB. Right. So because it is an semi-automated process, we do have some false positives in the data, and that would be dishonest of me to say we didn't. However, again, we try to keep them as a minimum. This isn't the tree map isn't created completely automated in a completely automated fashion. There is a significant amount of QA that goes on. Probably at the end of the process, probably 10-15% of the total process is manual QA, and that is where we try to get rid of as many of those false positives as we can. However, with a data set, let's take for Great Britain as an example of well over 500 million entities, it's quite difficult to ensure that you've eradicated all false positives in a data set of that size. But we actually get extremely positive feedback on the tree map in terms of its levels of accuracy, and we try not to be we try not to overpromise on the tree map. It's not a perfect data set, but it's certainly a data set that is unique in its completeness currently, and offers a level of accuracy that hasn't been achieved using any other techniques just at this time, certainly.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that explanation, Ralph. Moving to Abby. Abigail, the questions are, again, I'm going to connect two questions. One question is, again, by Duke. He's asking, what do you mean by over 95% accuracy? What kind of accuracy is that? And Pooja is asking, what is your vertical accuracy? So let's talk about the accuracy for Ecopia's data.
Yeah, and I'd love to take a lot of these conversations offline as well, just to go into really detail, because we've really worked hard to make sure that we're hitting high accuracy. But when it comes to the 95% accuracy, that's our precision and recall. So that's the absolute minimum we'll achieve. We've actually been tested by international organizations to be found to be closer to actually 97 to 98%. But that means maximum you're going to have is 5% false positives and false negatives within that data set. An important differentiation of our solution, which is what I was trying to emphasize here with all those screenshots, is that valid interpretation is also part of our accuracy metric, right? So that means actually 100% of the features are going to actually look like what that data looks like in the imagery. So you're going to have that lack of, you're not going to have a whole bunch of false positives and false negatives, but then it's accurately going to reflect what those features look like. And then on top of that too, it's going to follow all valid geometry rules. So buildings will never overlap one another. Same goes with roads, right? You're not going to have features of the same category will not overlap with each other. Those geometry, those lines are going to be accurate. They're not jagged. And then are also going to have a line of best fit as well. So if we're doing again, it's really easy just to talk about buildings, but this applies to all features. If you have a wall, it won't just be a whole bunch of little lines creating that wall. You're going to have that line of best fit. And then the vertical accuracy specifically, Bluesky does an excellent job really creating awesome imagery. And that's what we're creating our data off of. So they have a really refined positioning process. So we'll have that same 25 centimeter and 50 centimeter RMSE on the X, Y, and Z.
Okay, we can quickly talk.
Harney, do you mind if I add something to that?
Absolutely not. Please,
as well, because it's quite an important point as well, something to mention. So the imagery we output from our cameras and our production flow line is all true ortho imagery anyway. So there should be very little, if any, building lean on any of that ortho rectified imagery that we're outputting. So that in terms of the ortho product, that shouldn't contain the lean. But from Ecopia's point of view, they're using the stereo as well, which of course will potentially have some lean in those stereo images.
Perfect. Okay, I'll go back. I mean, this is a simple one we can answer quickly. David is asking, is AirMap broken into different products also?
Yeah. So I think what he was saying was, is it dividable? Like you kind of have imagery, DTM, DSM from Bluesky side. What we're doing is you have the different land cover classes. You can purchase them all together as once. If you want the full 3D land cover, you can just buy the sidewalks if that's all you need. You can buy the trees. So it's 3D land cover in general in a vector format, but you don't have to buy just the full product suite. You can just pick and choose between features.
Okay. There's a question. You just talked about the Detroit case study, so I'm going to take that question quickly. Duke is asking about, do you deliver change detection on the Detroit data?
Yes. So that's part of why we were really viewed as a partner for this team, is that was a really unique selling point, right? Wasn't that we created the data accurately once, which is what we do, and we're going to do here for 3D land cover in Ireland, but we can update this data really efficiently. So yes, we're identifying all those changes, because that's how you're going to figure out how much of someone's properties become impervious, or maybe they planted some soil instead and they changed the topography. But that was a huge component of it.
Awesome. Another one for you from Andreas. He's asking about land cover classes. Can you distinguish residential from commercial or industrial buildings?
Awesome question. One we definitely get a lot. This is based off of imagery, right? So if you're looking at just the imagery-based solution, that's not really something you can see in imagery. You're looking at a top-down. Yes, you get some of the angles in stereo, but that's something that we do some of that distinction as you further refine this data with alternative data sources. But at the time being, it's really just going to be a building with the area and volume and heights attributed to it.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from David Kelly about, are the textured meshes derived from photogrammetry or LiDAR, or both?
Both. So the beauty of the Leica City Mapper is we acquire stereo imagery and LiDAR data. So there are techniques which can do either or, of course, but the beauty of that is we're able to create the meshes using photogrammetry and then actually increase the accuracy and the precision of those 3D textured meshes using the LiDAR point cloud. So we would obviously say this, but from that point of view, they're the most accurate textured meshes that can be output at this time. I think that there's a general argument in the market that actually that you can create a similarly accurate 3D textured mesh using just photogrammetry, but they're usually people who don't have LiDAR that say that.
Okay.
So the answer is both.
Okay, there's one more question we can take. We're coming up on time now. Abner is asking, any urban property tax use cases with Ecopia AI algorithm? Abby, that's for you.
Yes. So we actually have a really exciting project coming out of Mexico that we'll be announcing, but that's definitely somewhere where this is used, right? Because it's that same requirement that you need really precise data to do the actual property evaluations. And we have done some of that actually also in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, but you need that base data to be really strong, and then you need to be able to update it, right? Because you want to have that stable revenue source, and property taxation is one of the best and tried and true ways of doing that. So we've been using that for that application. And since we're running on time, I'd be happy to kind of set aside some time to speak with you specifically to that.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of other questions which we definitely can take offline as well. So we will make sure that we get back to everybody and we have your information, so we can always reach out to you via email. So one last question for Abby. I think we could talk about this one from Duke. How do you predict the buildings that are covered? And is that also mentioned as an attribute? Because if it's a prediction, it can also be wrong. What is the correctness on the predictions?
Awesome. So in an effort to not take too much time, I didn't give the whole history of Ecopia, but we've been around for 10 years. We have ingested millions and millions, like hundreds of millions of kilometers of satellite aerial imagery, which means the training database we have is very consistent. So yes, while there is a degree of inference, just your chance of it being accurate is so much higher than if you just have a manual team doing that exact that actual extraction. So yes, of course, when you're doing a prediction, it's never going to be 100% accurate because you aren't seeing the ground truth. You're not looking at it and you're only looking at that source. But the prediction we're doing here is going to be significantly stronger than what you would do from a manual digitization approach. And we don't necessarily tie that into our metadata, but that's not necessarily, we can talk about that offline and see what your specific requirement is, because I don't think that's necessarily off the table.
Awesome. We're right on time. Ralph, any last comments?
Nothing specific from me, Hani. Just a big thank you to everybody that attended the webinar, and thanks to you guys as well for being such great hosts.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today live. We're so excited to see the response and engagement on this webinar. Thank you for all those questions. I know there's a couple of questions which have not been answered, but we'll come back to you. And there were a few questions and comments about the webinar recording. Yes, if you register for this webinar, we'll send you an email with the webinar recording in a few days. That's on me and my team, but we'll get that to you. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Abigail, for your time. Thanks, Ralph, for your time. And thanks, everybody. Good morning, good night, good evening, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.